Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Accelerating Accountability at Tesla, a 2022 investor preview of Tesla's annual meeting taking place on August 4th. My name is Courtney Wicks, and I am the Executive Director of Investor Advocates for Social Justice. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to advocate on behalf of a community of investors. Faith-based values promote human rights, climate justice, racial equity, and the common good. Our vision is to realize an equitable economy where investors leverage their collective voice and resources to advance social, economic, and environmental justice. We represent faith-based institutional investors, including the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, New York, who is the proponent of one of the proposals we will be discussing today. We are very excited to be joined by speakers representing a number of shareholder proposals going to a vote next week at Tesla's annual meeting. Our goal is to create greater awareness and support for environmental, social, and governance risks present at Tesla's business model that may affect long-term value and sustainability, including human capital management, child labor in the supply chain, racial discrimination, and worker health and safety. Thank you for joining us today. I am now going to turn it over to our moderator, Jillianne Lyon, Program Director at Investor Advocates for Social Justice.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Hello, everyone. I'm Jillianne. Some housekeeping items before we kick off to our speakers. This meeting is being recorded and you will be sent the recording and the slide deck following the webinar. We have a Q&A session at the end of our panelist presentations, but please feel free to use the Q&A chat function as we go along and we will answer questions at the end. With that, I am going to introduce our first speaker, Sister Winifred Doherty, who serves as the main NGO representative to the United Nations for the Congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd. Sister Winifred is a social worker by profession and represents her congregation to the UN with expertise on poverty eradication, human trafficking, violence against women, and integral ecology. Sister Winifred and our next panelist will be speaking to Proposal 12, going to a vote at the Tesla meeting, focusing on child labor and EV battery production. Over to you, Sister Winifred.
Thank you very much, Jillian, and thank you also, Courtney, and all the members of the IASJ team for the invitation to this webinar. The quest for clean energy, while admirable, covertly perpetuates violations of children's human rights and contravenes international law on child labour. As Jillian said, I am Winifred Doherty. I am representing Good Shepherd Sisters, the province of New York, Toronto, and the children and families in Kuwait, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Good Shepherd Sisters in Kuwait adopt an integrated approach to eradicate child labour and human rights violations in the communities negatively affected by cobalt extractive operations, addressing root causes such as poverty, lack of social protection, and alternatives to mining. Slide 2, please, Erin. There are 2 documentaries that outline the problem and showcase solutions the sisters are facilitating with children and families in their local communities. The first is a BBC panorama entitled The Electric Car Revolution, Winners and Losers. That features the project of Good Shepherd Sisters. And next slide. The second is an ABC Australian production, and this outlines the risks and dangers associated with artisanal mining and some of the complexities that hinder and negate efforts towards change. Next slide, please. The ingenuity and drive of Tesla to excel in electric vehicle battery manufacture is the sort of creativity and drive that the world needs to move towards sustainable development, contributing to the survival of the planet. Next slide, please. This is the second year that Good Shepherd Sisters are presenting a resolution calling on Tesla to issue a public report showing how the company is on course to eradicate child labour in all its forms from its battery supply chain by 2025, supporting Target 8.7 of the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We can stop the slide share now. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Sister Winifred.
I have another few moments.
Oh, I apologize.
We don't need the slides. Article 32 of the Rights of the Child states that the child has the right to be protected from economic exploitation and from performing any work that is likely to be hazardous to or interfere with the child's education, or to be harmful to the child's health, physical, mental, spiritual, moral, social development. This article of international law is not honoured as long as child labour continues, and the current data indicates that the numbers are increasing and not decreasing. Good Shepherd mission partners witness firsthand the harms of the health, development and education of children who are enticed by a few coins to engage in this work so as to have some food to eat. Their parents, also working in the mines, do not receive decent wages and benefits, nor have health insurance or safety standards in their places of work. Poverty, injury, and in some cases even death is a daily reality. As stated in the resolution, child labour in the cobalt supply chain exposes Tesla and its investors to financial, legal, and reputational risks. We ask for supplier criteria that are binding, enforceable, and regularly monitored for compliance with international laws prohibiting child labour and the company's own policy. For a company that seeks to position itself to be a socially responsible company, transparency and insurance of the rights and welfare of the company's social capital, including zero child labour and the payment of decent wages and benefits within the supply chain, are paramount to being socially responsible. Thank you. And I'll hand back to you now, Jillianne. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Sister Winifred. I am going to turn us next to our second speaker. We're going to be hearing from Terry Collingsworth, founder and executive director of the International Rights Advocates. He has been practicing law in the US for 35 years and specializes in international human rights litigation. His recent work has focused on preventing companies from violating children's rights in global supply chains. So over to you, Terry.
Thank you. I don't see me on the screen.
We are able to see you and your slides.
Okay. I need to be able to see the slides though. Can you put the first slide up? Yes. Next slide, please. The one remarkable thing in the marketplace now is that everyone is clamoring to get an electric vehicle. Biden is telling everyone to buy them. The fleet should buy them. But it's not a green industry yet. All of these vehicles are powered by blood cobalt, and particularly Tesla, because it's partnered with Glencore, one of the worst companies producing anything, but certainly in their cobalt mines in the DRC, where 70% of the cobalt comes from. Next slide. Next slide. It's important to emphasize that we are simply trying to, first of all, establish as a fact that child labor is endemic in cobalt mining. The first set of articles that's available in the slides we already showed, and this Amnesty report 2016 does an excellent job of detailing the conditions. It was also done with AfriWatch, an excellent organization in the DRC, detailing the conditions that child miners face. They contacted the companies asking what they were doing to ensure that there's not child labor in their supply chain, and they got a bunch of mealy-mouthed answers back and nothing definitive. Next slide. The Amnesty report also documents that the U.S. Department of Labor, UNICEF, and many other organizations have confirmed the fact of child labor. So there should be no doubt that there's child labor in the cobalt mining industry in the DRC. Next. And I went there in 2019 to investigate personally. I'd been invited by a couple of local organizations to see if we could explore possible legal remedies. Next. This is what my team saw when they went. These are children that are literally risking their lives every day for, as Sister Winifred said, a few pennies a day. The typical wage was about $1, and they often got cheated. But the important thing is they're risking their lives. I interviewed many children while there, and they all told me that they knew about mine collapses. They knew people and other children who had died in mine collapses. And when they climb into these mines, they know that that particular mine is going to collapse. The question is, will it collapse while I'm in it? That's what they all told me. And you can see there's no protective gear, no beams, no nothing. They're climbing into this soft shale-like rock. And anyone who does that a long time is either going to get killed or seriously injured. Next. So we went there in 2019 and spent a couple of weeks looking at both the conditions for child miners. And then I interviewed a huge group of families that had a child that was either killed or maimed in a mine accident. And then I selected 16 families to bring a test case. I'm going to show you a few pictures of the kinds of injuries that these children have experienced. Next. These are some of my clients. As you can see, they were severely injured in mine collapses. The boy in the center, John Doe 4, woke up in a hospital with his leg amputated. And he was telling me with tears in his eyes and tears in my eyes that he used to be the soccer star in his village, and now he can never play again. If he were in another country, maybe he could get some medical help, but this is where he is now. And he and all these other kids are lacking hope. And they asked me if I could represent them in a case against the people that we could hold responsible, the end users of cobalt who are doing nothing to improve the conditions. Next slide. So we did file a case almost immediately upon coming back, and we named Apple, Tesla, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Dell. Why these companies? Because with our research, we were able to get from their own disclosures. Most of them are in California and they had disclosure requirements. We were able to document that they were getting cobalt from either Glencore or Huayu, the two mining giants in the DRC. And all of our children, we were able to document that. The reason we selected the particular children that we did is they were able to document which mines they worked in. So all of those kids, the 16 kids that I represent, they were either injured or killed in a Glencore mine or a Huayu mine, and all of those companies supply to these 5 defendants. They supply to many other companies, any EV companies getting their cobalt from the DRC, but these are the ones we could prove were in a contractual venture with Glencore or Huayu. Next. The case is currently on appeal. Our case is due to be filed on August 8th. I'm not going to go into the details of it other than to confirm that we have a strong legal theory that we hope we can use to hold these companies accountable. Next. Now, a couple of quick things, because I know I don't have much time. It's important, particularly for purposes of this resolution introduced by Sister Winfrey and her group, that Tesla and Elon Musk, you can't believe a thing they say, first of all. Elon Musk announced in 2018 they were phasing out the use of cobalt. They were developing new batteries. And then 2 years later, he made a deal with Glencore to lock in, it's kind of a joint venture, their cobalt in the DRC. He's never responded to further comments about that. Next. And I want to just show you a couple of the reports. They're claiming that they're committed to doing this. They're claiming that they prohibit child labor in their supply chain. They're claiming to consumers that this is their policy and they're enforcing it. But they went into court and said, we just buy cobalt. We have nothing to do with what's going on in the DRC. And in response to Sister Winifred's resolution, I guarantee you they're going to say that they don't need it because they're already doing everything that could possibly be done, and they're doing nothing. Next slide. They continue to say they're mapping their supply chain and they're committed for the entire supply chain, which is just not true. If it were, they would sign on to this resolution and prove it. Next slide. The most important thing about their policies is that they do almost nothing to implement them, and they do nothing to verify them. The number of audits they do annually is a pittance, and I'm not aware that they've actually done any audits in the DRC. I've asked and asked and asked, but they're not auditing, they're just publishing policies. Next slide. So if they claim that they really already have these policies in place, we have to strongly urge them and the other shareholders to vote for the resolution, because it would essentially confirm what they claim, and it would allow real people who care to verify their claims. Next slide. If you want more information about the case or other work that we're doing on these issues, you can go to our website, internationalrightsadvocates.org, and there's information there on how you can directly contact Tesla and the other companies and tell them to stop abusing children. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Terry. We are going to move on to our next speaker, Simon Lewchuk, to talk about Proposal 11, Freedom of Association and Collective Bargaining. Simon is the Manager of Corporate Engagement and Advocacy at Share. He supports a network of Canadian institutional investors in taking action on the climate crisis and human rights. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Jillian, and thanks to all of our colleagues at IASJ for hosting us today. As Jillian just mentioned, Share is a Canadian nonprofit. We represent a network of religious investors, pension funds, universities, and Indigenous trusts. And I also want to thank our co-filers at Domini Impact Investment and SOC Investment Group, who together have filed Proposal 11, which, as Jillian mentioned, is focused on freedom of association and collective bargaining. So why don't we go to the next slide, please, Erin? Thanks. So we have a copy of the proposal up on the screen there, but I think I'd like to start just by being very clear on something, and I think it's a view that's held by many investors, is that the transition to a low carbon economy will not be just, and there will not be a transition if we don't uphold fundamental labor rights, and that includes the rights to freedom of association and collective bargaining. And despite Tesla's great initiatives and efforts in leading the transition to a low carbon economy and being a leading manufacturer of electric vehicles, we can't divorce that from human rights, and that includes labor rights considerations. And as we're going to highlight briefly, there's a significant governance gap when it comes to freedom of association and collective bargaining at Tesla. And so as shareholders who are focused on long-term value, we believe that the board really needs to address the material sustainability risks facing the company by clarifying its stance on these fundamental labor rights. And of course, we do believe that freedom of association and collective bargaining do enhance shareholder value, does things like attract and retain talent, helps improve health and safety, encourages workforce training and skills development, increases productivity, promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion, and strengthens human rights due diligence. I'd also be remiss not if I didn't mention that upholding fundamental labor rights such as these are also a key path for investors to address systemic inequality, which is a significant risk in our portfolios. So again, the board really needs to clarify and be transparent on how it is addressing these fundamental labor rights. And the resolve clause, which you can see up there, is very simple. It's calling on the board to adopt a policy to clarify its commitment to respect the rights to freedom of association and collective bargaining in line with the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work. We also suggest in the proposal that the policy should be applicable to Tesla's direct operations and subsidiaries, include a commitment to non-interference, prohibit any member of management from undermining these fundamental rights, and describe the ongoing due diligence process that Tesla will use to identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for any violations of these rights. Next slide, please. Clarity needed on this policy, and what is the gap, if you will, that it's trying to address. Well, certainly, I think a lot of people are aware of the reports of interference, public allegations going back to 2017 and 2018, that the company has repeatedly used anti-union tactics to undermine workers' ability to join or form trade unions. You may also be aware of the National Labor Relations Board ruling. And so just last year, in March of 2021, the NLRB upheld a September 2019 ruling that found Tesla was guilty of coercive interrogations, threatening employees over unionization, and firing employees for organizing. And I think it bears mentioning that very few, only about 5% of unfair labor practice charges in the United States actually become complaints. So that finding was significant. Then, of course, we have the CEO's history of public comments. Again, the NLRB ordered CEO Elon Musk to delete an anti-union tweet previously. And then in this March, the CEO challenged unions to hold a vote at the company's California facility, saying there wouldn't be interference. But of course, there's no corresponding policy or governance framework to operationalize a commitment like that, which gets to the next point, which is that there's a vacuum. There's currently no policy commitment from Tesla that's applicable to its direct operations on freedom of association and collective bargaining. In fact, the company's human rights policy, the silence is loud. It's very stark that while it addresses a number of other human rights, there's no mention whatsoever of freedom of association or collective bargaining. There is mention of freedom of association, collective bargaining in the company's supplier code of conduct, but of course that applies to suppliers, not to the company's direct operations and facilities itself, which again speaks to the gap and creates a double standard, which is why we believe it's really important for the company to be explicit on this. The company's peers, which I'll get to in a moment, almost all have explicit policies or mention of respecting the rights to freedom of association and collective bargaining that again apply to their operations. And then lastly, I think it's important to acknowledge the broader post-pandemic trends where we're seeing a growing interest and acceptance of unionization. And of course, I think many people on this call will be familiar with the organizing efforts that are playing out at other major companies, such as Microsoft, Amazon, and Starbucks. Next slide, please. So very, very briefly, you'll see that amongst the company's self-identified peers and those from ISS, all of the companies that you see up on the screen, unlike Tesla, do have an explicit policy commitment to respect the rights to freedom of association and collective bargaining, and all of these policies are applicable to the company's operations. And even amongst several of the company's peers that, like Tesla, are currently not unionized, for example, and these ones aren't up on the screen, but Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Hyundai, Volkswagen, Subaru, Daimler, etc. All of those companies I mentioned likewise have statements on respecting the right to freedom of association and collective bargaining. Next slide, please. In the company's opposition statement, which some of you may have had a chance to look out, the board of directors essentially said they don't feel that any further policies are needed. And you'll see on the left column there the company's position and our response. And I'm not going to spend much time on the slide, but I think it goes without saying that while the company says that they're committed to human rights, a blanket statement like that lacks a lot and does not, is not an explicit commitment to freedom of association. While a company points to their supplier code of conduct, again, that does not apply to the company's operations. While the company says that they comply with all applicable local laws, again, I would point to the NLRB finding, which suggests otherwise. And we also know that local laws oftentimes don't adequately protect the rights to freedom of association and collective bargaining. The company points to multiple methods that employees have to have their voice heard, things like an integrity hotline. The company points to works councils in Germany. And while these can be valuable mechanisms, they are not a union and they cannot replace the important role that collective bargaining and freedom of association have. Finally, the company has suggested to us in some of our conversations, well, these allegations are old or they're no longer material. But of course, it begs the question, what if anything has changed? If the CEO is talking about these issues in 2022 publicly, it would seem to suggest that these are material issues. And again, pointing back to the broader trends. And of course, the UN guiding principles also outline the responsibility of companies to respect human rights, including in their operations, where indeed they can have some of the biggest impact. Next slide, please. So the link there to the exempt solicitation, and I would encourage people, if you haven't already had a chance to look at that, please do. It goes into some of these arguments further. But just to reiterate, we do believe it's crucial for shareholders, for other stakeholders, including employees, to really understand how Tesla's policies and practices respect fundamental labor rights, and for the company to have an explicit policy on freedom of association and collective bargaining. And we urge you to please vote for proposal 11. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. I am going to move us to our next speaker, Kristin Hull, founder and CEO of NIA Impact Capital, a women-led registered investment advisor leading the charge to change the face of finance by hiring and training women and people of color in sustainable and transformative investing. Kristin will be speaking on Proposal 9, mandatory arbitration, going to a vote at the Tesla meeting.
Hello. Thanks to all of you for joining us today, and thanks to our organizers and of course co-filers and others in this effort to hold this company accountable to the very best human capital management. And that's what we're here for. NIA means intention and purpose, and we invest in those companies that are here to help with the transition toward the next just, sustainable, and inclusive economy. And we invested originally in Tesla about a decade ago, because we saw the potential of the solutions, the products and services that really were poised to make a big difference for our world. And as Tesla leads in innovation, we're also expecting them and asking them to step up to leadership when it comes to human capital management. And so we have filed, this is actually the third year in a row where we're filing on forced arbitration. And just to step into what does it mean when mandatory arbitration is within an employee contract, the resolution that we're filing, number 9, is asking Tesla's board of directors to oversee the preparation of a report on the use of mandatory arbitration and its impact on Tesla's human capital management and their workplace culture. And what does that mean for Tesla? We have significant concerns. They've been raised in the media by employees that actually come to us and file other places, the persistence of racism and racist actions at Tesla. And there's other discrimination claims as well. The California's Department of Fair Employment and Housing has alleged that hundreds of Black and brown Tesla employees have been discriminated against in job assignments, in their pay and their promotion rates. Allegations include those racial slurs, racist graffiti. And then when employees have gone to report these issues to their managers, they've been retaliated against when raising the issue. So we are certainly here to make sure that Tesla is able to recruit, hire, and promote top talent. And when they have issues of racial discrimination, forced or mandatory arbitration can actually mask that from other employees and from investors. And so it's quite amazing that we've heard this much about Tesla's workplace practices, given that they have this practice in place of mandatory arbitration that really can cloak, it's like a cloaking mechanism. Forcing employees into arbitration serves to silence incidents of discrimination, and it can mask patterns within an organization of racial discrimination. So if I were being discriminated against, I would not be able to talk about it to my fellow employees who may also be having those issues. It also stops employees from being able to have a court lawsuit, and it also stops a class action lawsuit. And so that's one of the biggest issues, I would say, is when employees are not able to organize on their own defense or on the defense of others, then it's really masking from each other, and then also really blindsiding investors as to what are the issues going on within the company. And of course, we know that Tesla has branded itself and the world as this place of innovation, and looking to protect any ROI and developments, they're going to need a loyal and committed workforce. And so really making sure that Tesla has a place and is able to be inclusive, and that those diverse hires that they're making are able to not only survive, but to thrive within Tesla. So we are asking the board to report on this, to look in on the issue, and we're asking everybody to vote yes on proposal number 9, because racism just isn't okay on any level, and we see it as preventing Tesla from moving forward in their innovation and their growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristin. I am going to move us along and introduce our next speaker, Julia Cedarholm, a Senior Associate of ESG Research and Shareholder Engagement at Arjuna Capital. Julia's work focuses on integrating sustainability into the investment process and engaging corporate leadership through shareholder advocacy. She will be briefing us on Proposal 8 on board diversity. Over to you, Julia.
Thanks, Jillian, and thanks, Courtney, and the rest of the team at IASJ and the awesome other panelists for their great work. My name is Julia Cedarholm. I am the Senior Associate with Arjuna Capital, which is an impact investment firm that engages in shareholder advocacy. We filed a proposal this year requesting greater board diversity at Tesla, and this is the first year that we filed this proposal at the company. So I'm sure you all are aware of shareholder engagements that have focused on this topic of board diversity before. There have been several other initiatives like the 30% Coalition and other investor efforts focused on getting racial and gender representation on the board up to about 30%. The proposal we filed this year, which is on the next slide, is a bit different than those historical engagements because we're asking not just for 30% representation from women or minorities on the board. Instead, we're asking Tesla to diversify its board so that it maintains racial and gender diversity that's better aligned with the US population and more representative of the company's employee base. We really believe that while that 30% metric that many investors have pushed for in the past has been really crucial in moving board diversity forward, we think that target really served as an interim target to achieving diverse boards that are reflective of the populations they serve. Our thought is, with the US and global population of about 51% women and US minority population of over 40%, we really need to set a higher standard for companies to increase their board diversity and not be okay with it just staying at 25 to 30%. So on this slide here, this is the text of the proposal that we filed, proposal number 8. You can see that we asked for board diversity better aligned with the demographics of its customers and geographies in which it operates, and specifically suggested board targets aligned with customer demographics. So if you go on to the next slide, so why is this proposal needed at Tesla? First and foremost, there is substantial research that proves that board diversity results in a more diverse workforce, higher revenues, higher return on assets, return on equity, fewer accounting mistakes, etc. Overall, board diversity is simply good for a company's bottom line. And we've seen that more and more investors, companies, regulators are getting on board with this and accepting this research, which has been reflective in the NASDAQ 2021 ruling, which requires listed companies to diversify their boards. We've also seen increased state legislation. I think there's about 12 states right now that have some sort of requirement around board diversity measures. And then we're seeing more and more large asset managers like BlackRock and State Street implement policies to vote against directors when boards are not appropriately diversified. However, as I stated previously, all of these measures really only ask for 1 or 2 board members to be from a diverse community. Meanwhile, this proposal that we filed is asking Tesla to achieve diversity alignment between its board and employee base. And then we thought this was really interesting. In a survey from ISS last year, a majority of investors believe that boards are more effective when they reflect the societies in which they operate. So this is something that investors are increasingly looking for. Yet, despite that investor sentiment, Tesla's board of directors is largely disproportionate with US population and employee demographics. Tesla is a really unique company in which it maintains a majority minority employee base. So 60% of its employees identify as minorities, yet only 25% of the board identifies as a minority. So there's a really big mismatch there. And then this proposal is incredibly important at Tesla too, because as Kristin mentioned previously, of all of the recent controversy it's faced currently and in recent years around racial discrimination and sexual harassment, which really shows a need for more effective and diverse governance from the top. Since 2017, there have been various lawsuits by former workers accusing Tesla of failing to curb racial discrimination and sexual harassment. As Kristin mentioned, it currently faces litigation with California State for failing to deal with these issues. And then numerous employees have alleged that while there have been repeat complaints about these issues to management simply continue to turn a blind eye. So we think these controversies really highlight the importance of Tesla ensuring greater racial and gender representation on its board so that it's better situated to respond to these types of issues in the future. So if you want to go on to the next slide. So this is Tesla's current board of directors. I want to mention that the company has released a board diversity matrix this year in its proxy statement, which is below on this slide. I'd like to think partially in response to this proposal. But in their opposition statement, which you guys might have read in the proxy statement, they reference this matrix stating that, this is enough, the proposal is unnecessary because they have included this board diversity information. However, just publishing this information, it doesn't get at the crux of our proposal, which is, once again, not just asking the board to consider diversity in the board nomination process, but to actively set targets and goals so that the board begins to look more like its employee base. Just as companies set financial targets and goals, we think it's really important that the company sets board diversity targets and goals as something to measure to and work towards. We understand diversifying boards won't happen overnight, but having goals and transparent reporting in place are really needed to create progress over time and to hold the company accountable to its investors, its employees, and its customers. So in conclusion, urge you all to support Proposal 8, which requests Tesla to further diversify its board to reflect employee and customer base. And this action can better position Tesla to respond to stakeholders' needs and interests and ultimately improve Tesla's performance. So thank you for your support.
Thank you so much, Julia. Before we turn to the Q&A session, I am going to introduce our final panelist, Gianna McCarthy, to speak about Proposal 7, Anti-Harassment and Discrimination. Gianna is the Director of Corporate Governance for the New York State Common Retirement Fund. She serves as the architect of the fund's Sustainable Investment and Climate Solutions Program. Gianna, thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you.
Okay. Thanks to IASJ for this opportunity to present, and thank you to the other panelists for your thoughtful comments. A little background on the fund and our holdings. The controller is the trustee of the New York. Tom DiNapoli is the Trustee of the New York State Common Retirement Fund. The fund has $279 billion under management. We own over 1 million Tesla shares valued at approximately $1.2 billion. The fund filed Proposal 7 on the proxy. The proposal requests a report describing and quantifying the effectiveness and outcomes of company efforts to prevent harassment and discrimination against protected classes of employees, including but not limited to sexual harassment and racial discrimination. The proposal is new this season and it has gone to vote twice before, including at Activision, where it received a majority vote of 67%. Tesla's 2020 Diversity, Equity, and Impact Report states, we insist on equitable practices, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because fair processes allow our team members to bring their whole selves to work. We value and include underrepresented communities at all levels of our company. Meanwhile, there have been multiple news reports, many of them covered by other panelists, allegations and lawsuits in recent years concerning gender and race discrimination at Tesla. These include a federal district court recently concluding that there was ample disturbing evidence to support the outcome of a California discrimination trial in October of 2021, at which jurors heard that the Tesla factory in Fremont was saturated with racism and that supervisor and Tesla's broader management failed to help. The judge added, and supervisors even joined on the abuse. The US EEOC has initiated an open investigation into Tesla, and after receiving hundreds of Tesla worker complaints, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing is suing the company over allegations of discrimination and harassment of Black employees at its San Francisco Bay Area factory. We feel shareholders need the information requested because, as Kristin outlined and been widely reported, most Tesla workers are subject to mandatory arbitration agreements. So consequently, there's little transparency into the extent of workforce mismanagement. Civil rights violations within the workplace can result in substantial costs to companies, including fines, penalties, legal costs, costs related to absenteeism, and reduced productivity. A company's failure to properly manage its workforce can damage corporate goodwill, making it more difficult to retain and recruit employees and jeopardize its relationship with its customers and partners. We're also concerned about reputational damage. A Deloitte Global Executive Survey on Strategic Risk found that the number one risk concern for business executives surveyed from around the world is reputation damage. The report observed a company's reputation should be managed like a priceless asset and protected as if it's a matter of life and death. Because from a business and career perspective, that's exactly what it is. For all these reasons, shareholders want increased transparency into the requested data, policies, and practices so it can better evaluate whether the board is effectively exercising its oversight obligations, its efforts translate into improved performance in managing its workforce and reputation, and there is alignment between Tesla's stated policies and actions. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Gianna. That ends all of our panelists' presentations. Thank you to all of our speakers for laying out the case for accountability at Tesla on so many relevant issues. Again, we will be sending out the recording and slides from today's webinar, but as of now, we are going to move to the Q&A session. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat or the Q&A chat function. But as I see, we don't have many questions right now, so I am going to start us off with addressing all of our panelists, a question for all of you. Many of you have alluded to the sentiment that Tesla is seen as kind of a sustainable icon for its important work on the energy transition. So my question is, what do you feel is one important thing investors need to know when looking at the actual broad scope of Tesla's sustainability risks? So opening it up to the panelists now. Go ahead, Derry.
Oh, just two quick things. One is that in our experience, as I indicated, that their policies are worthless. There's absolutely no obligation that the company feels to ensure that their policies, which look good on paper, literally are implemented. And second, just the entire notion that people are skipping over what I mentioned, the environmental devastation in the DRC, in addition to the abuse of children and adult artisanal minors. Those are horrific environmental and human rights crimes. How can we applaud a company that is literally built upon those violations? We need to do a better job of making them accountable to the public for what they're actually doing.
Thanks so much. Sister Winifred.
I'd just like to concur and agree with what Terry has said and say that, like, we on the ground in the DRC, in Kuwaiti, witness all of the pictures that were shown by Terry. We see that in reality on a daily basis. And mining companies are the cause of it. And Tesla, while Tesla say they do not engage with Glencore themselves organize, etc., we do know that they are engaging with the Glencore mines, and therefore they must be called out. And it is criminal, I will go that far as to say that they would be in any way engaged or have children in those conditions, in those mines. So that's my bottom line on it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Very powerful. We'll turn to Simon and then Kristin.
Yeah, I'd maybe just reiterate what I said at the top of my remarks about the importance of the just transition. Yeah. And, obviously increasingly investors are paying attention to this. Witness the World Benchmarking Alliance's just transition indicator, climate action 100+. And as we've seen with Tesla and their removal a few months ago from the S&P 500 ESG index, environmental credentials alone are not enough. And environmental sustainability and human rights are not mutually exclusive. And so, I think the theme of the proposals before you today, that is going to be an increased focus of investors, and increasingly looking into the details and kind of the E, the S, and the G all needing to come together.
Thank you for that. And I'll just echo what some of my other panelists are saying, is that, Tesla has built this brand of leadership, and yet we're at a place with people and planet that we can't continue extracting from our planet or from our communities. And when we spoke with Tesla about the mining issues, they seemed to think it was a governmental issue and it wasn't really their place to play. And yet we all know, and Tesla knows well, that it's a supply and demand issue. And Tesla has an opportunity to lead in human capital management, just as they do in technology and innovation. And so to see them step up now and say, we're going to provide education, we're only going to source from mining that is child-free, or where children are getting education and food, that's their opportunity to step into. And we as investors want to see them lead in that area. And similarly for, most companies really are moving away from forced arbitration because of the issues in human capital management. And so to see them leading, to see them actually putting into place a diversity, equity, and inclusion program, they really can be the best in the world. And we're asking them to step in and lead there as well.
Thanks, Julia, and then we'll turn to the questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what the others have said. I think it's really important just to take a broad perspective with ESG issues in general. As an impact investor, we've invested in Tesla for several years because of the electric vehicles and feeling like that's the products we wanted to invest in. But I think their delisting from the S&P 500 ESG highlights the importance of not overlooking maybe the racial discrimination issues and sexual harassment issues that are going on. It's really important just to look at all the environmental, social, and governance issues when making those investment decisions.
Thanks so much. I think that paints a great picture of the kind of broader network of risks facing Tesla. I'm going to turn to our first question in the chat from Pat Zarega. This is probably for Sister Winifred or Terry. Are there any good examples of reports about eradicating child labor in the battery supply chain from other companies?
I've looked at the other companies and I've sued several of them. Absolutely not. They're all going back to the Amnesty report in 2016. None of the companies have been forthcoming, and they're all pretty much playing from the same corporate playbook, which is don't do anything on the ground because it makes it look like you could, and then issue policies that most people will believe, and then you don't really have to do a thing. And I'm not cynical. That is just true. And I think that we all have a responsibility to, before we spend $100,000 or more on a Tesla, to ask them directly to document what they're doing to implement their policy. Because who wants to drive a vehicle that is otherwise a great vehicle that is powered by blood cobalt? That has to be the message.
Thanks, Sister Winifred.
I'd just like to also add that in our everyday work in the Democratic Republic of Kuwait, we have been engaged in larger advocacy, particularly in the African European context, where some companies have, and I don't totally agree with it or go along with it, because I believe there are international rules and laws to be followed, where some companies agree to, okay, minimize, if I can put it that way, some of the risks of child labor, and therefore would maybe supply or ensure that children had food or that there was some time to go to school, etc. Now, while that is very short-sighted, I feel nothing less than implementation of international law. And as I mentioned, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development back in 2015, when it was being negotiated, the global community saw that we could eradicate child labor by 2025, 5 years ahead of 2030. And this has not happened. In actual fact, and again, the numbers are increasing, and it had begun before the COVID. We can't just attribute it to COVID and the close down of schools. The increasing numbers began previous to the COVID experience.
Thank you so much for highlighting that. I'm going to move to our next question, which I think is probably for Gianna, from Constance on Resolution 7 to solve a problem of harassment. You asked for ex post indicators on the resolution of harassment complaints, the number of complaints. However, how will such indicators help prevent future harassment at Tesla?
Well, sunshine is always a good disinfectant, I think. And also year over year, we can see what their actual performance has been. I mean, we don't have at this point much transparency into what's going on at Tesla because of the mandatory arbitration clauses. So, of course, we're concerned about things going forward as well, but it will allow investors to make an assessment of past performance.
Thanks so much. We next have kind of a comment and a question related to child labor from Tracy, talking about Tesla's operations in China, which will pose increasing human rights risks in operations. It notes on the slide deck that the government mandated shutdowns grounded manufacturing to a halt. Unclear how robust its human rights due diligence is for that market. So if anyone had any comments about supply chain risks in China. And then a question from Francis, is Tesla a controlled company? For Terry, is anyone doing the real work on cobalt mining that provides a model for better behavior for Tesla?
Well, I can real easily answer that the first and the last part, that you don't need to reinvent the wheel in creating a model for responsible mining. You can go to Germany or Wyoming. Countries have mining laws, health and safety regulations that are functioning and have been functioning well, mostly all over the world. And that's what's particularly criminal about their behavior in the DRC. They know how to do it right. but they went to a place where no one cared if they did, and they did it the worst way possible with basically applying the law of the jungle. So Tesla or none of the other companies can say, or Glencore or Huayu, they can't say, well, we're trying to figure out how to make a mine safe. They know how to do that. Glencore has mines in the civilized world where there are laws that are enforced. They're just choosing not to do it because it's a lot cheaper to do it that way. In China, we've made efforts to trace supply chains, and we've been trying to look at Huayu a lot. It is impossible. A person doing it is risking their life because almost all of the companies have a state-owned component or an oligarch who is a state official. So it's almost viewed as a criminal act to try to dig around and expose the bad behavior of companies there. So there's a reason why they're all there, every single one of them, manufacturing as well as mining and refining.
Great, thank you. I think I am going to ask our last question, which is to all panelists, and summarizing the comment, the concern seems to be around policies that companies like Tesla have adopted in their disclosure that isn't necessarily changing the company's behavior. So is there a thought that the disclosure would not be deemed to be material? So how do we go beyond disclosure and reporting? So a question for all the panelists.
I'll start. So our proposal is calling for a policy, and I think in my view that's table stakes, right? That needs to be the starting place to ensure there's that robust governance framework. There's that message from the top that this is a right, in this case, freedom of association, collective bargaining, that the company cares about and is going to be filtered down to how it operationalizes that. That then, once we do have a policy in place, that then gives the basis for further dialogue with the company around, okay, well, how do you know that that is being lived out? How are you operationalizing that? What sort of due diligence processes are you using to follow it? So I realize some of my other colleagues in here, that their proposals are asking for reports and disclosures, but that's why in the case of the freedom of association one, given the huge gap that there currently is, we're starting with an ask for a policy.
Thanks, Gianna.
Very simply, we're voting against the directors that are up this year. That's on our website. We're also voting for all of the other shareholder proposals.
Great. I think that gives a very clear reasoning for kind of where we can go from here. But noting that we're right up against the hour. Sister Winifred, did you want to make some closing comments? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
I just wanted to echo what has been said, but we are looking for actual reporting to be done by Tesla to invite an independent evaluator to do this reporting with regard to their involvement or good practice or not good practice with the use of child labour. And so I think what's lacking is the transparency. I think Terry has shown, like all of the efforts that have been made in terms of trying to move towards some kind of litigation. But this is where we are at the moment. And I also would like to say that I think everything I have heard today, I would support all of the shareholders here, particularly the issues around gender and racial equity. So thank you very much.
Great. I think those are wonderful closing comments. Thank you to our panelists, attendees for joining us. We hope you will all join the movement to accelerate accountability at Tesla, starting with their annual meeting on August 4th. Just reiterating, we recommend you vote in favor of all the proposals shared today. We will be following up with recorded materials, but I hope you all have a great rest of your day.